In 2015, more than 1,000 people fell desperately ill after eating what was once America's most celebrated fast casual food. It wiped out $8 billion of value almost overnight. Chipotle was supposed to be the future, built on an $85,000 dream that rocketed to a $21 billion empire. But the same promise of fresh integrity hit a flaw so dangerous it nearly destroyed the brand. So how could one restaurant chain rise so high and collapse so fast? The real answer starts long before the headlines. Steve Ells stood behind the counter of a small Denver storefront in 1993, sleeves rolled up, assembling burritos by hand. Trained at the Culinary Institute of America, Ells imagined his future in fine dining, but the realities of rent and risk led him to a different path. With an $85,000 loan from his father, he opened Chipotle Mexican Grill on East Evans Avenue, a few blocks from the University of Denver. The idea was simple but radical for the time. Serve food made from fresh, responsibly sourced ingredients, prepared with the care and technique of a high-end kitchen, but sold fast and affordable. The mantra, "Food with Integrity," was more than a slogan. It was a promise Ells made to every customer who walked through the door. Word spread quickly. By the end of the first month, Chipotle was selling 1,000 burritos a day. Lines snaked out the door, students and locals drawn by the aroma of grilled steak and hand-mashed guacamole. There were no freezers, no can openers, and no microwaves, just open flames and fresh produce delivered daily. The menu was short: burritos, tacos, and a handful of sides. Each order was built to the customer's taste, with a visible assembly line that let people see every ingredient as it was added. The focus on fresh ingredients became part of the draw. Denver's booming food scene in the early 1990s was mostly about steakhouses and chain restaurants. Chipotle, with its minimalist decor and focus on quality, stood out. Ells worked the grill himself in those early weeks, coaching staff on the right way to sear chicken or chop cilantro. He insisted on naturally raised meats and local suppliers whenever possible, even though it meant higher costs and tighter margins. The gamble paid off. The store's daily sales quickly surpassed what Ells had projected for a full-scale fine dining restaurant. As the cash register rang and the buzz grew, Ells realized he was onto something bigger than a single burrito shop. The success wasn't just about the food, it was about a new way of eating out, one that rejected the shortcuts of traditional fast food. But growth required capital, and Ells knew he couldn't do it alone for long. The next chapter would bring new partners, new risks, and a test of whether his chef-driven vision could survive the pressures of scale. By 1998, Chipotle had caught the eye of the biggest player in fast food. McDonald's, eager to diversify beyond burgers and fries, invested $360 million and took a controlling stake. The cash infusion was immediate rocket fuel. Locations ballooned from 16 to more than 500 in just 7 years. But the partnership was uneasy from the start. McDonald's executives pushed for drive-thrus, breakfast menus, and a franchise model, moves that promised efficiency but clashed with Steve Ells' insistence on fresh ingredients and hands-on prep. Boardroom debates grew heated. Ells refused to compromise on sourcing or let go of his food with integrity mantra, even as McDonald's pressured for faster, cheaper growth. The result was a delicate balance. Chipotle used McDonald's capital and supply chain muscle, but never surrendered its core identity. When McDonald's divested in 2006, Chipotle was ready for Wall Street. The company's initial public offering, priced at $22 a share and doubled to $44 by the closing bell, the strongest restaurant initial public offering in 6 years. Investors scrambled for a piece of the action, betting on the promise of a new kind of fast food. The company's market capitalization soared, and McDonald's walked away with a $1.5 billion return on its investment. Chipotle's rapid expansion seemed unstoppable. By 2015, the chain reached more than 2,000 locations, and its stock price hit a record of $758.61 per share. Store margins climbed as high as 28%, with the average restaurant pulling in $2.5 million a year. Millennials and Gen Z diners packed the lines, drawn by the idea of customizable, ethically sourced meals. Chipotle wasn't just a place to eat, it was a cultural phenomenon, a lifestyle brand, and a symbol of the fresh food revolution. Investors called it the Tesla of tacos. Wall Street analysts described the company's growth as a once-in-a-generation story. For Steve Ells, the challenge was how to keep the original promise alive while managing a company valued at over $21 billion. The higher Chipotle climbed, the more there was to lose. On August 5, 2015, health officials in Minnesota logged a troubling pattern. Dozens of people had fallen ill after eating at Chipotle. 64 confirmed cases of salmonella were traced back to tainted tomatoes served across multiple locations. The headlines barely had time to fade before a new wave hit. By late October, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention detected a cluster of E. coli infections in Washington and Oregon. At first, it was just a handful of patients. Within days, the count climbed, first to 12, then to 22, and then to 52 confirmed cases across 9 states. The youngest victim was just 1 year old. 22 people landed in the hospital. No one could identify a single contaminated ingredient. As investigators scrambled, Chipotle closed 43 restaurants in the Pacific Northwest. But the problem refused to stay contained. In November, new reports surfaced from California, Minnesota, New York, and Maryland. Each day brought more names, more diagnoses. In December, the CDC announced a second, genetically distinct E. coli outbreak, this time reaching Kansas, Oklahoma, and North Dakota. The chain's promise of transparency and safety was being tested in real time, with no clear answers for frightened customers. Then, on December 8, 2015, another crisis. 141 people, mostly Boston College students and athletes, fell violently ill after eating at a Chipotle near campus. Norovirus, not E. coli, was to blame this time, but the symptoms were just as severe: vomiting, fever, and dehydration. News cameras captured students in wheelchairs, parents waiting anxiously in hospital corridors. Across the country, the numbers kept ticking higher. By the end of 2015, more than 350 people had been sickened in 5 separate outbreaks. Over the next 3 years, the toll grew to more than 1,100 confirmed illnesses as new incidents of norovirus and salmonella surfaced in California, Ohio, and Virginia. Each spike brought fresh waves of fear, confusion, and anger. For many, a simple meal had turned into a medical ordeal. The clock was running, and Chipotle's crisis was only accelerating. In the aftermath of the outbreaks, teams of public health investigators descended on Chipotle restaurants across the country. They combed through supplier invoices, sampled produce, and swabbed kitchen surfaces in search of the pathogen responsible. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention deployed its most advanced tools: whole genome sequencing, pulsed field gel electrophoresis, and rapid polymerase chain reaction tests, hoping for a genetic fingerprint that could link a single ingredient to the wave of illnesses. But the science hit a wall. Every lettuce leaf, tomato, and batch of cheese tested negative for E. coli 026. No environmental sample from any closed restaurant turned up a match. Even with the power of DNA analysis, the labs found only absence. The challenge ran deeper than technology. Chipotle's supply chain, built for freshness and speed, relied on massive pooled lots of produce. Tomatoes from dozens of farms were washed, diced, and mixed before being shipped out nationwide. By the time investigators arrived, most suspect ingredients had already been served or discarded. What remained was a forensic dead end: no contaminated batch, no smoking gun. The customizable menu complicated matters further. Patient interviews revealed no single ingredient eaten by every victim. Some had steak, others chicken, some guacamole, some none. Lettuce, cheese, salsa, each was implicated, but none exclusively. The overlapping choices made it impossible to trace exposure through a straight line. Epidemiologists mapped meal histories and distribution routes, but every path looped back into a maze of shared ingredients and interwoven suppliers. Whole genome sequencing did confirm that cases in different states were genetically linked, but without a positive food sample, the connection led nowhere. Investigators described the process as chasing shadows. The absence of answers only deepened public anxiety. If experts could not find the source, how could anyone feel safe eating at Chipotle again? The mystery left a gap in trust that no amount of reassurance could fill. For a brand built on transparency, the silence from science was almost as damaging as the outbreaks themselves. The numbers told a story that no amount of reassurance could soften. In the final quarter of 2015, Chipotle's same-store sales dropped by 14.6%, the sharpest decline in the company's history. Revenue for the quarter fell to $997 million, and earnings collapsed by 44%. The chain that once drew crowds for lunch now saw empty dining rooms and idle assembly lines. At some locations, staff stood behind the counter for hours with nothing to do. A former manager from a busy Chicago store remembers the silence. They used to have a line out the door from 11 to 2. After the outbreaks, some days they would serve half as many people as normal. You could hear the refrigerators humming. Wall Street responded with panic. In just 4 months, Chipotle's stock price plummeted from $757 to $475, wiping out $8 billion in market value. The company's total valuation, once a symbol of the fast casual boom, swung by more than $25 billion from its peak to the lowest point of the crisis. Investors who had championed Chipotle as a can't-miss growth story were now unloading shares at a loss. Financial analysts questioned whether the brand could ever recover its reputation or its margins. The fallout stretched from boardrooms to street corners. Franchise operators and store managers braced for layoffs and budget cuts. Crew hours were slashed. Some stores closed early or skipped opening altogether on slow days. For employees who had once prided themselves on serving food with integrity, the mood turned anxious. Customers, once loyal, now hesitated at the door or stayed away entirely. The damage was not just financial. Chipotle's promise of safety and transparency was under siege. Each new report of illness, each social media post about an empty restaurant deepened the sense that something fundamental had broken. The company's leadership faced a stark reality. Survival would require more than apologies and deep cleaning. The next chapter would demand a sweeping overhaul of everything from supply chains to store-level training. For the first time, the future of Chipotle Mexican Grill was in doubt. Chipotle's leadership responded to the outbreak crisis with a wave of internal reforms that reached every corner of the company. More than $25 million was funneled into overhauling food safety, an investment that dwarfed anything in the brand's history. Operations teams rewrote protocols from the ground up. Every supplier was subjected to rigorous audits and new compliance checks. Produce shipments were held for DNA-based pathogen screening before they ever reached a prep table. Tomatoes, lettuce, and cilantro were all tested with methods once reserved for forensic labs. The company centralized more of its food preparation, cutting down on the number of hands touching ingredients and shrinking the window for error. In the restaurants, the culture shifted overnight. Sick leave policies were rewritten to guarantee paid time off for ill employees, removing the old financial pressure to show up sick. Managers received new training on how to spot symptoms and enforce exclusions, with corporate audits now tracking compliance in real time. Checklists grew longer and inspections more frequent. Chipotle's Food Safety 7, a set of daily procedures, became mandatory reading for every crew member. At the same time, the company launched aggressive customer outreach. Free burrito giveaways and loyalty programs tried to lure back wary diners. Marketing campaigns promised a safer, more transparent Chipotle. Behind the scenes, the operations team worked around the clock, racing to restore confidence before the next headline could undo their progress. The scale of the overhaul revealed just how much was at stake and how far the company was willing to go to win back trust. Federal prosecutors stepped in as the full scale of Chipotle's failures came to light. In April 2020, the Department of Justice announced that Chipotle would pay a $25 million criminal fine, the largest ever imposed on a restaurant chain for food safety violations. The charges detailed how, between 2015 and 2018, over 1,100 customers fell ill from foodborne pathogens, traced to breakdowns in sick leave enforcement, hygiene, and oversight at dozens of locations. The company's own policies, meant to keep sick workers out of kitchens, had been ignored or poorly enforced. The settlement required Chipotle to overhaul its safety protocols and submit to 3 years of federal oversight, with the threat of renewed prosecution if reforms lapsed. The penalty landed just as Chipotle's founder, Steve Ells, was preparing his exit. After stepping down as CEO in 2017, Ells left the board entirely in 2020, closing the chapter on the chef-driven vision that had defined the brand for nearly 3 decades. His departure underscored the cost of the crisis, not just in dollars, but in leadership and legacy. Investors watched for signs of recovery. By 2019, Chipotle's sales and stock price had climbed back from their lowest point, fueled by digital ordering and aggressive marketing. Yet even at the height of the rebound, per-store sales remained about 15% below their 2015 peak, a gap that revealed just how deep the damage ran. Competitors, meanwhile, seized the moment. Rivals like Sweetgreen and Cava ramped up their own food safety messaging, luring away wary customers. Regulators, too, tightened industry-wide standards for fresh food supply chains, reshaping expectations across the fast casual sector. The reckoning at Chipotle set a new benchmark for accountability, leaving a permanent mark on how the industry defines and enforces integrity at scale. Today, every Chipotle meal is a test of trust, rebuilt but never guaranteed. Food safety remains a national fault line, one misstep away from crisis, no matter the brand's promise. As fresh food trends surge, the vulnerabilities exposed here echo across the entire industry. For every bite, the question lingers: how much risk are we really willing to swallow? Share your thoughts below.